Okay, so good afternoon, everyone, and good morning to those of you that have joined us from the States. We just had a few technical issues, but hopefully you can see my screen and you'll be able to hear all the panelists. We have Global Upside have partnered with us. They have sponsored this event. If you would like to know more about Global Upside, have a look at their website. If you have any questions, feel free to email Melanie at globalpayrollassociation.com if you'd like to get in touch with them, or you'll be able to get in touch with them through their website. Okay. Right, so just to go through a few housekeeping rules, could you please ensure that all your phones and PCs are on silent? Just sometimes we may get the odd random person come through. And if you do have any questions, could you ask those? You should have a box in the right-hand side of your screen. And if you do have any questions, then feel free to ask, and then we'll have time at the end of the webinar to go through those. Okay, so let's just start off. Raghu, I don't know if you could unmute your phone. We have Raghu, he's a co-founder and CEO of Global Upside Group.
Hi, this is Raghu.
Hi, Raghu. Could you please just let the audience know a little bit about yourself, your background, and also about Global Upside?
Yeah, so as you all see my name on the screen, I am Raghu Bhargava, the CEO of Global Upside Group. We're about a 20-year-old company providing back office services across the planet, from finance, accounting, HR, the employer of record, and staffing services. So it's the group caters to the client journey from starting to hire an employee to putting them on payroll, whether it's on your own entity or on the on our books from an employer of record perspective. And then as you scale up, we can help with the incorporation, setup of entities, bank accounts, that kind of stuff, and go into the daily operations, payroll accounts, payable accounts, receivable cycles, year-end compliance from a statutory compliance perspective, VAT, GST type returns, annual company law compliance, income tax returns. So it's a very comprehensive solution that we provide in over 100 countries across the planet. Thanks, Melanie.
Right, and Felicia, we have Felicia Cheek. She's a Global Payroll Advisory Program Practice Leader at the Hackett Group. Felicia, please let the audience know more about yourself.
Sure. Again, hello, everyone. My name again is Felicia Cheek. I lead Hackett's Global Time to Pay Advisory Program. I'm based in the United States, but I service clients around the globe. We take a major role in helping our clients with their global payroll vision, their strategy, as well as helping them with vendor selections. We also do lots of benchmarking. We're probably best known for our global payroll performance study. So I'm excited to speak with all of you today. Thanks, Mel.
And we have Neil Sutcliffe. Neil is an independent consultant who has a lot of experience. But Neil, over to you, and I'll let you explain to everyone who you are and what your experience is.
Thank you, Mel, and good morning and good afternoon to everybody. Yes, Neil Sutcliffe, spent 25 years plus in the payroll and HR outsourcing world, the last 15 of which have been involved international payroll, global payroll, helping companies actually achieve their vision of unifying their global payroll operations and trying to improve the whole perspective they have on their global workforce.
Great, thank you, Neil. Okay, so let's start today's webinar. What are the most complex countries for payroll? Raghu, would you like to start off answering this question?
Yeah, a little bit of it depends on what piece of the payroll you're focused on. So, there's a lot of complexity around processing and getting to the right net pay number and payroll taxes that go to the government, things like that. But there is also that aspect of payroll around how do you pay the employees. So, for example, in Serbia, it becomes extremely complicated because without a local bank account, you just cannot pay your employees. Obviously, payroll complications vary from country to country from a net pay perspective, because like in France, there is a lot more types of taxes, and every single type has to be detailed on your pay stub as well as reported to the government at the line item level, compared to a country like US, where there are very nominal types of taxes in terms of different kinds. And then, if you go to countries like China, where a lot of the employees are going to be Chinese nationals, local nationals, which is very common, but you are going to, from time to time, have expats. And when it comes to expat payroll processing, not only is there additional reporting requirements with the government, but additional differences in computing taxes. So, these things become very complicated from region to region. And another country where this is a little complicated is Brazil. For example, one of the issues you have to worry about in Brazil is that if an employee is going to go on vacation, then you have to pay them for that vacation time before they go on vacation. So in some respects, it's not a payroll complexity in terms of computations and stuff, but in other respects, it is payroll complexity because you have to worry about, hey, who's going on vacation when, and how do I get them the net pay in advance of their vacation. So those are just some examples of things that do change from country to country.
Neil, do you have anything to add to this?
Yes, Mel, I do. I think we've also got to take into consideration not only just what are the legislative requirements around what local tax authorities impose in countries, and as Raghu's rightly pointed out, the likes of France, the likes of Belgium, but also other countries where there is a complex pay arrangement inherent in the country, which things like Germany, where you have lots of different collective bargaining agreements, which are made irrespective of legislation, but they apply across different industries, different job types. So I think it's that background as well as to what cultural aspects there are within a country that brings additional complexities. And in countries like Germany, like Sweden, like Spain, we've already mentioned Brazil, and there's also Argentina, where again, those kind of things are there in the background and you can't escape them.
Okay. Oh, sorry, bear with me. Sorry about that, guys. Okay, so we'll go back to what are the top considerations for a global payroll operation? Raghu, would you like to answer this first of all?
Yeah, I think we just talked about, Melanie, about complexities by region or even by country. And so the question really is, as you are building a team to do payroll, whether it's internal or what, the question becomes is how do you manage through that? How do you understand how these CBAs might impact your payroll in Germany or Sweden? And things like that. So what you have to worry about is having the right talent, which depending on your headcount in each of these countries, you may or may not be able to build to that, because it is very hard to hire somebody to do German payroll when you have, say, 2, 5, 10 employees. Obviously, if you have 200 employees in Germany, it's a different answer. So that's where some of this has to do with either hiring people that might be very expensive, that understand a lot of complexity across the globe, or hiring a service provider like Global Upside or somebody else similar to us, where we bring that expertise, we bring that talent in many, many individuals because of us being a corporation versus that one single employee that works for the company. And then also understanding some of these other requirements, like I talked about, how do you pay the employees? How do you have all of your bank accounts set up so that you can, because many governments will not allow you to pay taxes without having a local bank account. And not every bank even in a particular country may be qualified to pay taxes. So there are complexities around a lot of this stuff down in the minutia, which do matter and which people running payroll need to understand and cater to.
Okay. Felicia, do you have anything to add to this at all? Do you, with regards to top considerations? Okay, maybe Felicia, can you hear us? Okay, Neil, do you have anything to add to this at all? Oh, Felicia, you're there now.
Sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Yeah, just a couple of things I wanted to add. One of the things that you really want to consider is your organization structure. How you're going to deliver service. So what's your service delivery model going to look like? And when we think about the service delivery model, there are several different components that you should consider, which will ultimately help you with your global payroll strategy. Another piece of that is your governance. What type of governance are you going to have in place? What type of activities are going to be managed at the global level versus the regional level? And then there are some things that may need to be managed, or there maybe need to be oversight at the local level. So those are some of the key things. And then finally, change management. What type of change management and communication plan are you going to have in place? Because a global payroll operation, even though you're processing payroll and most companies are, paying employees in an accurate and timely manner, but when you start to globalize, there's lots of change that occurs. It has to be communicated, and there is a method to the best way to roll out a global payroll strategy.
Okay, thank you, Felicia. Okay, what impact have you seen over the last 5 years in respect of governments increasing the level of compliance, policing, especially in very complex jurisdictions, as we mentioned Brazil earlier, and e-social? Neil, do you want to start on this one?
Yeah, I will, Mel, thank you. I think here there's an increasing amount of digitization across the globe, and I picked out Brazil because obviously this year e-social comes into full force within Brazil, but it's been around now for 4 or 5 years in terms of companies getting ready for it, depending on their size. This hasn't simplified things in Brazil. Nobody's simplified their tax regime, their rules. It's just gone digital now. And the key here is increasingly it's easier for local tax authorities to police what's going on with companies, to ensure that they're being compliant, and if they're not, to start to increase their imposition of fines. When a system is highly reliant on manual effort, it becomes harder for those authorities to actually police that to any great degree, and often have picked on larger organizations because the potential rewards of finding non-compliance issues are greater. But as things become more digitized and easier to police, then that impact starts to trickle down to smaller and smaller organizations. So the need to be compliant in a local jurisdiction, especially where digitization is coming in and there's a lot more interfaces with tax authorities, is becoming increasingly important, especially if you want to avoid being penalized by those same authorities.
Raghu, what's your thoughts on this?
Yeah, so digitization is the future of everything. We know that. We've come a long ways in that respect, and payroll is sort of the last bastion of where a lot of government entities, a lot of people have held off on doing that. But a lot of this can help, a lot of this can hurt. So what Neil was talking about in terms of the reporting requirements. So if you don't have a system, how are you going to upload all your data from Excel into a government portal? Yes, that does create challenges, and that's why payroll systems are extremely important. And they also help with maintaining the accuracy, integrity of data and calculations and things like that, because it's harder to screw up a system versus Excel, which you could easily make a formula error. But there's also the advantages of digitization, which is like for example, in France now, employees can elect and get an electronic pay stub, and which was not allowed before. So those are surely benefits for companies to reduce the amount of paperwork and effort required to not just pay but compliance beyond payment. So that's and keep in mind, guys, the issue of contractor versus employee. So every single government across the planet is strapped for cash. So they are cracking down on things like, are you properly treating your team as a contractor or as an employee? And like in the US, we used to have this 20-point checklist that if you went through that and if a great majority of the points were in favor of contractor, you could hire somebody as a contractor. But there have been recent cases in the US where they are cracking down on even on that 20-point checklist, and it's no longer a safe harbor thing that, hey, I checked the boxes and 16 of those meant they are a contractor, or 2 of them implied that they were an employee. And some of that because the environment is also changing with the gig economy, in terms of the mobility that the employees desire or your team members desire, and sometimes they desire to be more treated like a contractor versus an employee. Those all are on the radar of the governments, various governments, and how do they tax these people? How do they make sure that the proper revenue is derived by the government is driving some of that. So you will see more legislation come through around a lot of this stuff. You will see more requirements, reporting requirements, and a lot of companies are starting to cater to that in terms of being able to track and report electronically. So lots happening in that space.
Thank you, Raghu. Thank you. Okay, so Raghu, what would your recommendations on balancing local flexibility with global standardization be?
So, global standardization is sort of an utopia approach, and global standardization, I'm not sure will exist, at least for a very long time. So even when we look across the EU, which behaves as one unit, it doesn't mean that the French and the British and the German payroll have similarities. And so what you're facing is that you want to get to that utopia, but what is happening really is that every country has their own requirements, rooted in their culture, rooted in their history. So it is not going to be so easy to upend those. I mean, we've heard a lot about how the strikes in France around all the changes being advocated by their current president. So, those are things that will impact the future, but we have to keep that in mind today, because no country is going to just say, hey, yeah, sure, I'll just adopt the German regime and do payroll across EU in that manner or what have you. So those are going to be real challenges that we're going to face, and this goes back to that, how do you manage that local requirements while having a shared service center or while having your team based in one location, because you don't have enough people in any given country. Because in that respect, there is no globalization. It is all local.
Thanks, Raghu. So let's go on to the next question. Okay, so we're still talking about RPA. Have you seen an increased drive for automation and robotic process automation, RPA? And what impact does it have on payroll? So Felicia, can we start off with your thoughts on this?
Yeah, good question, and we are seeing and hearing lots about RPA, or robotic process automation, and it definitely is going to have an impact on payroll. We are not seeing it have as big of an impact as it's going to have. So when we look at companies, most companies are starting their RPA initiatives in finance and then moving to HR payroll. And from an HR payroll perspective, we're seeing more and more companies initially focused on automating the onboarding process. And what we're finding is, as companies automate the onboarding process, it creates a lot more automated payroll process, payroll process is a lot more automated, because a lot of the things that are plaguing payroll really occur from activities upstream. One of the other things that we're seeing, and we're seeing clients from a purely payroll perspective as it relates to RPA, really focusing on some of the activities that you're doing on every payroll or periodically that take quite a bit of time. So we have one client that actually was able to reduce the amount of time and resources working on the pension calculation. I believe it's Germany. Don't quote me on that, but they were saying that the pension calculation was taking them 300 hours, and it required between 6 to 8 payroll resources to do that every time they did it. And through RPA, they were able to automate that process, and they lowered the time to 8 hours, and it takes 2 people to do that. So those are the types of things that you should be looking for, things that are repetitive, that every time you do them, they're you follow the same steps. Those are excellent opportunities for RPA.
Raghu, what's your thoughts on this?
Yeah, absolutely, things that take an enormous amount of time need to be evaluated, and part of RPA is just in my mind, a little bit of it is different, where you want to have connectivity within systems, so that you eliminate that need for that human touch to the extent possible. And yes, something like a 300-hour union contribution calculation is a great example of where, if you can bring automation to it, yes, that can be immensely beneficial versus 8 hours. So the technology, the AI involved in it, is improving day by day. I still think it's a little bit out there, though. Some companies, like in the example Felicia quoted, they have been able to develop and customize and execute on it, and that's very, very good for them. But and it also depends on how many employees you have and those kind of things. So obviously, the larger the population, the more beneficial it is to have RPA type solutions.
Mm-hmm. And so, Neil, do you have anything that you wanted to add to this at all?
Yeah, I've got 2 other little things to kind of throw into the mix of what's driving this, I think, and that is, first of all, greater access to technology to employees to be part of that automated process, and therefore the ease of the ability to roll out automated processes that go right down to employee level. So the advent of smartphones and the spread of those is enabling companies to think about more processes to automate. And then secondly, it's the external influences on automation. If we take the UK, for example, in terms of what HMRC has done over the last few years to drive companies to automate processes around starters and leavers and aspects like that, those kind of things are just continuing to grow. Whether it be tax authorities, whether it be pension companies, they're looking to improve their processes, and they have an impact on payroll, and those automations will come in one shape or another.
Thank you, Neil. Okay, let's go on to the next one. So this is obviously quite a topical subject. So how would somebody fund their global payroll globally? So Raghu, over to you on that one.
Yeah, thanks, Melanie. You know, I started off very early on in this conversation about an example with Serbia, where that is one of the hardest countries to do business in from a payroll perspective, payroll funding perspective, because you have to have a local bank account in the name of the employer. So it is not like you could have an account in somebody else's name and use that for funding payroll. It will create lots of problems for both companies, the employer and the non-employer companies. So how can you fund payroll in other countries? And there is two types of options typically, one being where the government requires you to have a local account to pay for payroll taxes, versus other countries where actually in the first category, it may not just be the government, it may also be, for example, in the UK for pension plan funding, that you need to have a local account to fund your pension because the pension providers want to withdraw it directly from your bank account. And then the other part is just the net pay funding to the employees. The net pay funding can be done with various means. So if let's just say a U.S. company doesn't have a bank account for their UK employees, they can wire the net amount from here to UK, and that would be an acceptable answer. Obviously, you have to cover the cost of the wire and all that stuff because the employees are going to want to pay for that to receive their net pay. Outside of that, there are companies like Global Upside that help their clients fund payroll, so you can fund the payroll here in the US. We have accounts across the planet. We have options across the planet to be able to fund those payrolls locally or pay the payroll taxes locally, keeping in mind that, again, the example of Serbia where you cannot do it remotely. So those are some of the options you have some of the challenges and options you have when you need to do funding.
Okay. Thanks, Raghu. I see we have some questions, but we'll leave those to the end. Okay. Are there any further trends that impact payroll strategy? So let's go over to Felicia for this question.
Sure. So just a couple of things that we're seeing. We are definitely, and this is not just unique to payroll, but cloud technologies really are having a big impact on payroll, on some of the things that we are able to do, particularly when we're talking about global payroll and processing payroll across borders. And integration. So we're starting to see more and more vendors come up with more sophisticated integration tools to better connect payroll data and just the entire payroll process across borders. That's a big thing that we're seeing, and it's definitely making an impact on what companies do and the way that they look at the vendor landscape. The other thing, obviously, we talked a little bit about is RPA. When we talk about the trends, RPA will probably have, it will be one of the things that has the biggest impact on payroll, and not just RPA. Some of the other digitization like AI will also have a big impact on payroll and just automating. So switching the focus from highly transactional to a much more analytic process improvement type focus. And when we start to think about the impact of digitization on payroll, I would be remiss if we didn't say anything about the impact that it will have on the talent. The type of resources that companies are looking for to work in payroll are going to be different. The characteristics of those resources, the responsibilities, the expectations are definitely changing, and that's a major trend that's impacting training of resources in payroll.
Okay. So Neil, your thoughts on this?
One of the other trends that I've seen over the last 3 or 4 years has been increasingly the need for organizations to understand and to have access to the people who actually do the payroll. You know, we've got many different ways that people can get a global service provision. They could outsource it themselves on a local basis. They can go to an aggregator who can outsource it to whatever various contractors within country. You've got organizations that can do a large number of those countries on their own. But increasingly, irrespective of what model people choose, the desire to know who's doing the payroll locally and having access to those people, either on a local level or a regional level even, has been something that I've seen grow in clients' minds. It's certainly the pure aggregation model and hand it all over to an organization who then just takes care of it all for clients. I think that approach is weakening as time goes along. People are less trustful of that model and want to have deeper contact and more access to those local providers.
Raghu, have you got anything to add to this?
Yeah, I think you know, one of the future trends that's going to for sure impact payroll, and some of this Neil is touching on, is this whole GDPR that is the new rules that are coming up. And I think we're going to talk about GDPR a little later also, but knowing who is doing your payroll is extremely important. Knowing what processes they have in place for protection against GDPR violations is important. And so that is for sure a trend that isn't just a short-term trend. It is going to continue for the rest of our lives, and evolutions of GDPR as they may be. But yes, automation for sure is something that we are seeing, and maybe not as much on the RPA side, but a lot more on just connected systems, things that can be done a little bit more without employees having to touch it 17 times, will impact payroll and cycles, and a lot of companies are improving their payroll systems. We're not a payroll systems provider, we are the people aspect of it, but we do see a lot of changes coming through on the system side of things, so that'll continue to change.
Okay, let's go on to the next question. Thank you. Software in the global industry is changing. So what's available, what's missing? Raghu, do you want to answer this first of all?
Yeah, you know, this is an interesting question, because if you look at the largest players in the payroll industry, yes, a lot of them have global solutions. A lot of them are what I call kludged together, where in the back they may have a front end, they may have a front end that is supported by their own resources, directly connected resources locally in certain countries, but really there isn't a single company that provides a global platform to do global payroll, where there is no other involvement of any third parties. So it doesn't matter whether you look at the largest payroll providers or some of the smaller players, more regional players. So what is missing is really that one system that you could log in, like a workday for an HRIS, similarly a payroll system for doing payroll, where you log in and you can say, hey, look, while I'm making a change to my UK employee, I can just go over to another screen and make a change to my German employee or French employee or whatever it is, and this is all in sort of one system, one platform, by one provider, without any dependencies on other people, and that is the biggest piece that is missing today. And we are talking to a lot of providers that are actually coming up with different solutions, or solutions where they are the single provider. And so some of these GDPR issues, some of these other things that are happening, and knowing the local provider becomes less and less relevant. The problem with that is still that these payroll companies that have better solutions are catering only to the largest employers. So if you have 1,000 employees across 5 countries, you may not even hear about some of these solutions. And even if you hear about them, they may not want to take you on as a client because you are too small for them from their perspective, even though a 1,000-person company is a fairly large company. So those are some of the challenges that are facing the software industry, or from a software perspective, and how things need to change and what is missing.
Neil, do you have anything to add to this at all?
Yeah, kind of a slightly different slant on what Raghu said, but certainly very much in agreement with what he said, and that that holy grail of a single platform that can do payroll wherever, I think will always remain a holy grail. Simply go back to the fact we discussed earlier around, it's unlikely there's ever going to be the harmonization required across various jurisdictions to get similar kind of payroll environment. So on that basis, it's that ability of providers to improve their middleware, that layer that sits between companies, other technologies such as HRIS, be it time and attendance softwares. It's that layer that sits between that to manage data integration on the input side, the process management, the robotics that we just talked about. And on the back side of that is to enable it to do improved compliance reporting and also improve reporting generally back into the business. It's that's changing, as Raghu says, and increasingly getting better and better from various providers, trying to build solutions that fit into that. So I kind of an agreement very much with Raghu there, but that's how I see it building.
Okay, thanks, Neil. So what are the challenges when implementing the global payroll? Felicia, would you like to start off with this?
Sure. So just a couple of things. Technology is always a challenge. Really being able to clearly define your requirements, and from a solutioning perspective, being able to identify a solution that really meets your requirements from a technology perspective. And when we talk about technology, some of the main drivers are integration. So, and integration is important because we want to be able to have a very similar customer experience from country to country. And then the other thing would be change management. And when we talk about change management, just really being clear that you understand the changes from all perspectives. And when we talk about understanding the changes, also realizing that the change, the experience of the change might be different from country to country. So you need to make sure that all of your players, everybody involved in the project, clearly understands that. The other thing I would say, and I think it's most important, is when you are creating a business case, make sure that you're very clear on the ROI, the time that it takes to really achieve cost reduction. It's a little bit different from other projects. And so you have to be really clear in setting expectations that some of the initial benefits are not necessarily going to be cost, but they will eventually lead to cost reduction. So we always tell our clients that's very important, that you really communicate that and make sure everybody understands initially at the beginning of the project or the payroll transformation.
Okay, thanks, Felicia. Neil, over to you.
I'm kind of going to agree to a large degree there with Felicia. My spin on it is, how aligned are you, from a change perspective internally? That's going to be the key challenge. I think, we often concentrate and focus on those aspects that very much sit above the waterline, the obvious ones around the technology, as Felicia rightly points out, the business case, etc. But in terms of making these kind of projects a success, a lot of it also relies on the various individuals around the globe within your organization, and ensuring that your local, regional, even global management are all aligned on the drive for this and why are you doing this, and making sure that everybody's behind this project, then that is absolutely crucial to success. You know, a lot of organizations, you know, some of their success comes from the fact that there's a king in every country, and it also can be your downfall as well. If that king is not thinking like all the other kings, then it can become a real problem for you. So ensuring alignment to this from a change perspective is absolutely vital.
Yeah. Thanks, Neil. Raghu, have you got anything to add?
Yeah, you know, the points raised are extremely valid and very applicable. And yes, having a realistic expectation is the most important thing. Beyond that, it is about the talent. So it doesn't matter which system you pick. It does not matter what countries you pick, but making sure that you internally or externally have access to the right talent. Because when you are setting up a new payroll system, there's a lot of complexities. So you need people that understand those local requirements. Because you can tell the payroll provider to do certain things, and they might just do it for you, but doesn't mean you're going to get the right answer day in, day out once you go live on it. So having those processes built around the audit, having the right people doing the audit, evaluating is the system giving you the right answers in the test phases or not. And we've seen a lot of this where, you know, people think that they can just do it with, say, one internal resource. Well, that one internal resource might just be focused on day-to-day payroll. How is he or she going to have the time to carve out and do sort of a second job of getting the system up and running, making sure it's, you know, the test scenarios are run properly, the audit work is done properly, to have that comfort. We've stepped in many situations where we've had to, you know, just take over and delay the go live by, you know, many months. We've seen that happen time and time again because the internal team doesn't have the resources. And so getting management buy-off on saying, hey, look, we need to either hire somebody outside or bring in some temp resources or whatever that is, how are you going to play this out? And then even when you bring in those resources, understanding that they do understand what the complexities are in China, Brazil, India, Germany, France, just to name a few, because those can play very significantly into your success or lack thereof, and delays in go live and things like that. So can cause a lot of grief.
Okay. Thank you, Raghu. So, what are the best practices for procuring and managing benefits, including when you have a small headcount? How do benefits differ from the US? So, Raghu, this question's for you.
Yeah, so benefits are a very interesting story because it again varies from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. So till the Affordable Care Act was passed in the U.S., as an example, you didn't really have to offer any benefits. You didn't have to offer any vacation. There is no law that dictates that till the Affordable Care Act, ACA, came into play. Obviously, that is the statutory requirement side of things. There's obviously the non-statutory or supplemental benefit requirement of things where if I didn't offer, say, vacation pay or paid time off, nobody will come work for Global Upside, as an example, or if you don't offer health benefits, health insurance, things like that. So then you have to focus on those, and most countries outside of the U.S. have very clearly defined statutory benefit requirements. As an example, in UK, there's a pension plan requirement, and now it is applicable to all employers, whether you're a one-person employer or a 10,000-person employer. So it is applicable to all. And when, in particular, when companies from the U.S. expand overseas, they're like, oh, we don't offer a 401k here, we won't offer the pension plan there. Well, no, you don't have a choice on it. It is statutory. You are violating the law if you don't do it on day one. So those are differences, and people need to understand that. But then when you go overseas, and now in UK you can actually buy a plan for one person. Before it was very, very hard to buy one before the law became effective. But similarly, when you need to buy a health plan, as you clearly understand, one employee doesn't make a group. It is just one employee, and a lot of people are unwilling to, a lot of brokers are unwilling to underwrite that, a lot of insurance companies are unwilling to underwrite that because there is just not enough money, there's not enough mitigation of risk with that one employee. So we have worked with companies, clients, to help with that because you may have a little bit of a challenge with the first person, but you need to show the brokers, you need to show the insurance companies your plans of hiring and this and that and other things. And sometimes it's just finding the right broker, which we do have a big network of people across the globe where we can work with them to say, hey, can you just underwrite this one person, even though they don't intend to hire a second person for, say, a year or two. And so knowing your options, knowing the requirements, knowing how to work it with local brokers, and most people don't have a network of that. So, how does an employer based here in the U.S. find that right broker in 5 different countries for that one employee each becomes really challenging. So sometimes you don't have an option, and you have to have that employee go buy something on their own. But most times, knowing the right people can allow you to put something in place that can work as a, so to speak, group plan. Mm-hmm. And then even when the employee goes and buys on their own, so for example, if we only had one employee and that person went and bought a personal policy and we reimburse the employee, that becomes subject to income tax. So there are other complexities that you face when you do some of these things as to how do you address the payment issues and things like that. Do you have to gross up the wages because you are reimbursing them some premiums? So there's a lot of complexities on the HR front that come into play when you are having that one employee, the first employee in a particular jurisdiction.
Okay, thanks, Raghu. Okay, so we're near the end of our webinar before we actually go to your questions. But what I asked the panelists was, what one giveaway would you provide the audience? Because obviously this is such a broad subject. So Felicia, can I start with you? What one giveaway would you provide, or what one giveaway would you give people?
Just make sure that you do a comprehensive analysis of your requirements, because that's going to be key to your success, and not just gathering requirements, but a comprehensive analysis of your requirements.
Thank you. And Neil?
I think for me, it's kind of following on Felicia's comment from there and earlier, which is be clear about why you're going to do this in terms of taking a global approach to payroll. What is the driver behind this? What are you trying to achieve? Clarity of vision on that is essential, because without that, it's the classic. You're looking for your destination. If you don't know where your destination is, you're going to struggle to get there. So you need to know where you're going.
Okay, Raghu.
Yeah, so my take on my giveaway would be just, guys, plan for it as much as you can, because things are going to happen that you're not prepared for. Things are going to go wrong. Things aren't going to work out. Timing may not work out. As an example, one of the big payroll providers, you can sign a contract with them and then they'll tell you that, hey, if you want to go live in Japan, you'll have to wait till 2019. How is that going to play out in your global implementation? Is the management prepared for it? So those are things that you need to worry about. And the one thing that I did not mention earlier was this issue of currency. So you kind of have to think about how are your employment contracts structured. Are they structured in local currency or in a foreign currency? and how do you process payroll, because eventually when you process payroll, it has to be done in local currency. And we see this from time and time from companies across the planet where they are structuring a contract, employment contract in their local currency, but the employee is in a different jurisdiction, so in a different currency, and they don't know how to address those then, and it is a very sore subject on an every payroll period and things like that. So those are things that you have to worry about in addition to things that Neil and Felicia talked about.
Thank you. Okay, so we have some questions. So one of the questions we had is, what is e-social? So would somebody be able to explain what e-social is, please?
I'll have a go, Mel. It's quite simply the whole digitization of the tax system in Brazil, and it's not just for payroll, it's all types of taxation across the board, whether it be corporate taxes, individual taxes. The whole system has gone digital now. Okay. That's the very, very high level description, by the way.
Okay.
If you know, if you do kind of look it up on Google, there are some very good papers on it if you're short of reading material.
Okay. Okay, but no, there's a high level overview. Okay. Okay. We currently have payrolls at local level, but want to central HR and employee demographic data without purchasing or supporting an expensive ERP. Any suggestions, excluding using Excel? Is there a way to do it? Raghu, would you be able to answer this?
Well, let me say that Excel is not a solution to anything. Maybe a simple spreadsheet to do some basic calculations is different, but it is not a system to do payroll ever. And it doesn't matter whether you have 1 employee or 100 employees. But yeah, there are solutions. There are service providers, payroll service providers, and I'm talking from a systems perspective for a minute, where like I referred to them earlier, where they have a global system. If nothing else, it is at least one front end where you are used to doing business a certain way, you get used to it, and then in the back they might be working with local providers or whatever it is to actually get you the final answers on payroll and things like that. But the other option is, and a little bit of this depends on how many people you have in how many countries and what's the distribution of your headcount and stuff, where what you may want to do is hire somebody like a Global Upside or somebody like that, where we have expertise in global payroll, where we can be that one point of contact, where we can be that one provider of payroll services. So you're not having to deal with 15 providers in 15 countries, because you want to get off Excel. You really want to be off Excel and onto a system, and a lot of providers bring systems to the table, whether it's their own or through a third-party software provider. But you do need to think about that before you just say, hey, let me just get off Excel, because there isn't really a solution. I mean, Excel is not a solution, but there isn't. It is extremely hard to do this on your own, is what I'm trying to say.
Okay, so stay away from Excel, ideally.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, we have something. I've got a question on the benefits side. Would consultants? So I think this is potentially self-employed people. Would consultants need same benefits as full-time employers in the EU? I don't know if this is too much of a broad question, but would that be something that you could touch on at all, Raghu?
I'm sorry, Melanie. Can you repeat your question?
Yeah, would consultants need same benefits as full-time employees in the EU?
Yeah, so this is the consultant versus employee, and technically the answer is no. But like I was talking about this earlier, that more and more governments are cracking down on hiring consultants versus employees. So you really have to evaluate what does this candidate look like once he starts working for you? Does he look like an employee? Then you actually should hire him like an employee and offer him all the benefits that are available to your other employees or required by law, maybe even supplemental benefits because it's customary in that country to do things. But if you are able to qualify them and they are truly a consultant employed by somebody else, they have a book of business, they work for you 2, 3, 4 hours a week or some small number of hours, and they make their living by doing this for many companies, then they truly are a consultant. And in that case, you don't need to provide them benefits. You just need to provide them whatever the agreed upon rate is. And in countries like the US, you then have reporting requirements around that where at the end of the year, you have to issue them what is called a 1099. It's an IRS Internal Revenue Service form, just from a compliance reporting perspective so that the government can connect the dots and make sure that they are paying tax on all of their income.
Okay, thank you, Raghu. We do have somebody that's mentioned the big subject GDPR, particularly in Europe. So we touched on this slightly. Do you think it's going to have a big impact on the industry, basically? What impact will GDPR have? Raghu, do you want to answer this one?
Yeah, I mean, that's a GDPR is a regulation coming out of the EU, but let's be very explicit. Let's be very clear that it is not a rule that is only applicable to Europe. It is applicable to every company that does business within a European company or has a European employee or deals with anybody across any function in the EU, which is a big population, which is a big economic unit. So as an example, Global Upside has to comply with GDPR whether we have or don't have any employees in the EU. And I get about 5 or 7 emails every day on this issue from various people. Some of them are our clients, some of them are our partners, some of them are vendors, some of them are employees. They're all asking about how and what are we doing for GDPR compliance. And the awareness of GDPR is becoming more and more prevalent, not just because the deadline is fast approaching of May 25th, but there is the flip side of things like what happened at Facebook, the Cambridge Analytica case. So people are becoming more aware, and yes, in countries like US, if we were just a domestic service provider, we could care less about GDPR. But most global employers, most global service providers are directly, indirectly impacted by GDPR. So this is a big deal, and yes, we will see how it plays out after May 25th.
Yeah, okay. Does anybody else, Neil or Felicia, I don't know if you have anything further to add to that at all?
I was just going to say, the point made earlier about companies increasingly wanting to know who's doing their payroll, where is their data, who's got their data of their employees. All that GDPR does is reinforce that need to understand the whole chain of supply around employee data. And so just going to an aggregator and an aggregator says, well, we'll cover you for GDPR. Increasingly people are nervous about that and want to know more, want to go deeper.
Okay. Brilliant, thank you. Well, it's not far away, so we'll see what issues or how that pans out in the next few months, I suppose. So,
Mel,
Felicia, sorry, yes.
No, that's okay. I just want to add just really quick as it relates to GDPR. I definitely agree with what everyone else says. One of the things that I will say, and I think it's very important, is particularly in payroll when we think about the aggregators, which is it's a common form of processing in global payroll environment. We think about the ICPs and the aggregator. It's very important that you fully understand roles and responsibilities as it relates to GDPR. So you want to know, who the processor is. That is probably one of the most, if you had, 4 or 5 things that you really need to know, really to make sure that you're prepared for May the 25th. That's one of the things. Make sure that you clearly understand what the roles are, and that may vary depending on who you're using. It may vary at different points in the process.
Okay, thank you. Okay, let me just see if we've got any more questions. No, I think that is it, and that just finishes us just before a minute before 5 o'clock. So thank you once again, the guys from Global Upside, for partnering. It'd be good if I could speak with this webinar today. I hope you found it useful. We will be sending out slides after this, and you can also look at the recording as well. So if you want to listen to the recording, you're available. You can do this through the link. So thank you, Felicia and Neil, again for your support and joining us this afternoon. If you do have any further questions that you'd like to ask us, please email melanie@globalpayrollassociation.com. And then I will forward your questions on to the panelists from today. So thank you once again.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone, for attending.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.